the defender of our civil rights online. What we'd like to do is to provide an opportunity for different people to ask different questions and go through. So I'm not sure if you have some things to kick it off with.
Sure. So thank you everybody. Welcome. We're very glad to be here for another year at B-Sides with the Ask the EFF panel. My name is Kurt Opsahl. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And this is a Q&A format. We only have a half hour, so we're going to get pretty quickly into your questions. I just want to say just a couple of quick ground rules. One of the things that we do is we represent people. We give them legal advice about their situations. We enjoy doing that for this community, but this is not the place for that. If you have a attorney-client privilege communication, let's have that in private. So if it's a question about your specific legal situation, we should talk at another time. So with that important warning, let me just ask the panel to introduce themselves.
Hi there, my name is Eva Galperin, and I'm a global policy analyst for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I work on EFF's international team.
I'm Cooper Quintin. I work on EFF's tech projects team on things like HTTPS Everywhere, Privacy Badger, and Let's Encrypt.
I'm Andrew Crocker. I'm a staff attorney on the Civil Liberties team.
I'm Shahid, Buttar. I'm on the activism team, one of the newest additions to that part of the organization.
All right, thank you. So, since we have a short time, we're going to get, I guess, straight into your questions. Do we have a roving mic? We do. All right, we have a question here in the center.
Kurt, would it behoove us to take something at once?
Probably just one at a time.
Where do you think the Apple FBI thing will end up?
All right, Apple FBI. I think.
So
well, that's the next 30 minutes.
The question was, where is it going to go? What? So I think that one thing that's really interesting about this is that it's kind of a win-win for the FBI. If they win this case, that's great. And if they lose, they can take it to Congress and say, hey, here's a story where we couldn't get access to something that we needed access to. Let's try to pass a law. So we see this as a battle on two fronts, right? We have to win in this court case in particular, and we have to make sure that Congress doesn't pass really bad law mandating access to encrypted communications. And I think it's kind of a long game on both sides.
Can I jump in there? The one thing I just say is that as Congress considers these issues, one thing that's very different than at times in the past is that there is a major corporation holding the line on values that matter to all of us, ironically paying better heed to the constitutional values than the officials who swear oaths to defend those values. In this moment where there is a great deal of attention to that controversy in particular, this is an especially ripe time for elected representatives to be educated about particularly the way that in the digital arena the analogies to the past no longer hold true. And so to the extent you either have those relationships or if you don't, now is a great excuse to develop them. And if you do, now's a great opportunity to take advantage of those to make sure that the factual premises of the debate are understood widely. And I think the most important among them is that security for one is security for all. That is effectively how it works. And that is not widely understood on Capitol Hill, certainly. So the spin correction of the intel agencies among members of Congress and editorial boards is especially important right now. And we can do a lot of that, but it's much more effective when coming from many nodes. So we're excited to see you here.
Question in the back.
Hi, thank you guys for your activism and your support for our rights. And I have a question regarding the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I was wondering if you could explain how it affects us as security professionals and how it affects the individual rights of internet users in the United States.
Well, this is actually kind of a tough one because the 3 people we have in the office who work on TPP full-time are not on this panel. But I can tell you that one of the biggest problems with the Trans-Pacific Partnership has to do with copyright, which is that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, much like ACTA, is trying to export all of the worst things about U.S. copyright law, like very, very long terms of copyright, without exporting any of the things that make U.S. copyright law kind of okay, like fair use. And they're trying to pretend that this wouldn't actually be a change to U.S. law, which is the reason why it wouldn't have to, go through a legislative process. And furthermore, they want to pretend that this is entirely in line with law all around the world. And so this is usually framed as normalizing copyright law. But the way that this normalization process works is it works like a ratchet, which is to say that you propose a very limited kind of draconian copyright maximalist law in TPP, and then you make everybody kind of contort their copyright law in order to fit into that box, and then afterwards you say, well, this is the copyright law that everybody has because it's been normalized. This is definitely a problem for anybody who cares about fair use, who cares about other countries in which they have considerably laxer copyright laws, who cares about creativity. For the most part, the way that creative that art gets made is standing on the shoulders of giants, and the more difficult that this is for people to do, the sort of sadder and more limited the Creative Commons will become.
I think we had a question in the front. Yeah.
So I haven't seen this issue get a lot of news, but as some people might know, there's been a Supreme Court vacancy recently, and that seems to be really important for rights online in terms of the Fourth Amendment and privacy protections. But the times people get to interact with that is rare. Is there anything we can do for changing the legal landscape for protecting privacy without going to the Supreme Court and through that slow political process?
The question is, what can we do without going to the Supreme Court? Or?
Exactly. So the Fourth Amendment, that states basically that you needed a warrant to search someone's information, has gained a very restrictive interpretation in that as soon as you give your data to a third party, say the cloud, it's not private anymore.
So, yeah, a couple of notes on that. I mean, there are a number of important issues which will probably eventually get before the Supreme Court on the Fourth Amendment. I mean, so we have our case against the National Security Agency about whether the Fourth Amendment protects against the warrantless surveillance program. There's the question of the third-party doctrine, which the government contends means that anything that is operating in the cloud using a third-party service detrimentally affects your Fourth Amendment rights. And these are also important questions. With Scalia gone, and it remains to be seen how that will affect the court. Scalia actually was pretty good on Fourth Amendment issues. He had a number of important decisions, like was part of the majority on determining that you need a warrant for cell phones. But he was not perfect on that, but it was pretty solid. We won't know until we see some nominations, see how that plays out. But your question was, what can we do other than going to the Supreme Court? And I think that we work within the law, but we also work with technology and we work with activism. So I think Cooper and Shahid.
Yeah, I was going to say that one way that you can affect change without going through the legislative or judicial process is with technology, right? If you don't like that the NSA is able to read traffic, right, you can encrypt all the traffic. And there are ways to force constitutional protection via the technology that we implement, right? So if we encrypt all of the internet, then, we have really, kneecapped the NSA's ability to massively collect data. Thanks. So I think that, that's a really actually super effective way, and obviously much faster than trying to go through the legislative process.
And just to add a couple of pieces to that, you're totally right to note that the Fourth Amendment is very much in flux, and this answer and the question about the TPP, sort of bridging across these two, these are both issues where the public consciousness is still getting molded, and as the Fourth Amendment's norms get applied to emerging technology, the courts at least have yet to be very definitive about how the principles play out. which is to say we have opportunities across the three branches of government and the three layers of government, which is to say executive, judicial, legislative. I'm going to come back to that. Federal, state, which I'm going to come back to, and local, to essentially push the ball. The courts are inherently reactive institutions. Legislatures can be proactive, especially when pushed by diverse communities of their constituents. California very recently adopted one of the nation's very advanced digital privacy laws. This is CalECPA, the California Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And it doesn't create a federal Fourth Amendment right, but what it does is by creating a state analog, these inform what a federal judge's construction of a reasonable expectation of privacy might be. In the Jones case, this is the GPS case before the court, 2-3 terms ago? Alito's 2012, so 4 years ago. Alito, in his, I guess it was a concurring opinion, talks about how the ubiquity of cell phones under the prevailing terms of use indicate what people's expectations of privacy are. So by adopting privacy promoting technologies, by pushing state level laws and local laws, like one that's in play in Santa Clara County at the moment, that better enshrine privacy standards, you can shift the courts through these other channels too. You might describe it as like popular constitutionalism. That's my shtick, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it later.
All right, thank you.
I have a question. How closely should we be tracking the Wassenaar security export controls?
I got this. How closely should we be tracking the sort of progress of the 2013 changes to the Wassenaar arrangement? In my opinion, this is very inside baseball, but like all people who are deep inside baseball, I believe everyone should be tracking this very closely, especially a room full of security researchers. For those of us who have not been playing along since 2013, in about 2011, 2012, a whole lot of research came out, which demonstrated that European companies were selling surveillance malware to authoritarian regimes that were then using it to spy on activists and journalists. And this is a very bad thing. So the European countries who were involved in the Wassenaar arrangement, which is a sort of, it's not even a treaty. It's basically an agreement between, I think, 40 countries, which normally governs weapons, so landmines, machine guns, this sort of thing. And they decided that they were going to add surveillance software as a thing which the Wassenaar arrangement would cover. So each country that had signed on to Wassenaar needed to change its export control laws to control surveillance malware. Now, the way in which this stuff was written into Wassenaar was actually super vague, because it turns out that the difference between surveillance malware and the stuff that you use to watch your network because it's your goddamn network and you would like to not see people breaking into it, is kind of vague. And so not only was this stuff all written very poorly and could be used to stop the communication between security researchers across borders, but then the way in which the United States first proposed to implement Wassenaar included a export control on 0 days, which were not even mentioned in Wassenaar. They just kind of threw them in at the last minute. Nothing could possibly go wrong with this plan. Now, security companies of the sort that you will be seeing all week at RSA immediately went up in arms and said, how the hell are we supposed to go about our business if you implement the Wassenaar arrangement in this way? So the good news is it looks like the U.S. will not be implementing the Wassenaar arrangement in this way. Now, the next step is we need to wait until, I think, early this spring or this summer, when all of the Wassenaar countries meet to talk about the language in the Wassenaar arrangement, and we will have the opportunity to suggest rolling the Wassenaar arrangement back, basically saying this suggested language was a terrible idea. It was not going to work. For example, the export controls went into effect, but did not, in fact, stop Hacking Team, which was one of the companies that was found selling to authoritarian regimes, did not stop them from selling to a single authoritarian regime. So this is basically, badly written, badly thought out junk and should be rolled back. This spring and this summer, we're going to be looking at an opportunity to do that. And what everybody here can do is they can get in touch with their congressional representative, and they can let them know that it's important for them to talk to the State Department and the Department of Commerce and the Department of Homeland Security, and let them know that it is time to roll back the Wassenaar arrangement. So yes, you should totally be watching this very closely.
Hello. Earlier, Jan Schauman talked about librarians and their role of teaching patrons about privacy and security. So I'm asking because I don't know, because I've never worked in a public library, but what initiatives do you already have in place or resources do you have to help librarians communicate better with their patrons about privacy and security? Do you have any arrangements already, or is that something that you're looking at in the future?
We are at least setting up crypto trainings and oh yeah, sorry. The question was for librarians, what resources and materials we might have to help librarians engage their patrons and help support their privacy and digital rights. And I'm not sure about the materials we have available. I will certainly affirm your point that librarians have been some of the on the leading edge, really, of privacy activism, dating back to when the Patriot Act was first introduced over a decade ago. We are setting up crypto trainings and digital security workshops around the country, including in partnership, we're talking to the New York City Public Library about some events there serving their patrons. It's a great idea. We'd love to put some more time into it. One thing that libraries can do, and that several around the country have done, is host tour relays. And those have become controversial in some places. And I can think of at least one case, though the place escapes me. I think it might have been Philadelphia. Was it New Hampshire? Last fall?
New Hampshire.
Right. You want to talk about it? I think you know more than me.
Well, I'll just say this is something that interests me. I am a librarian. So I did actually send a survey out on my Twitter feed earlier, and I asked librarians if they had to speak to their patrons about privacy and security, could they? And the answers were yes, somewhat, or absolutely not. And I'm still waiting for more results to come in. And about 6 months ago, I was approached by a hacker who was very much interested in helping libraries, and he wanted to get Raspberry Pis into libraries and help with exit nodes and things like that. So he wanted me to help him get into the library world. So there's definitely a need and there's interest, and it's something that I've been trying to work on as well. And also Library Freedom Project, obviously, all the amazing work that Allison McCreen has been doing. So yeah, I just think that's a great opportunity to really get out there, because the public librarians are right on the front lines helping people. And oftentimes, you won't believe the crazy questions librarians get from from people. And this is really a great way to help move your mission, is because the librarians are right there dealing with people every day with stuff like this.
If you can hang out afterward, I'd love to have a chat with you. Yeah.
All right. So the primary thing that we have done at EFF, which is helpful for teaching people about privacy and security, whether they are librarians or people who are unfortunate not to be librarians, is surveillance self-defense, which you can find at ssd.eff.org, and this is our privacy and security guide. I've actually done a lot of work with the Library Freedom Project, and I've given trainings to librarians, and I very recently did a podcast with Allison McCreen, which was all about privacy and security threat modeling for people in libraries and museums. To think about sort of the needs of their users.
And we also, on the legal side, have filed some briefs on behalf of libraries. In our NSA case, we filed a brief on behalf of the ALA and some other library organizations, trying to make the case that libraries have this special role in protecting privacy, just so that it's sort of clear amongst the other privacy rights that courts are considering as well.
All right, so my question is, what is the EFSF's current stance on coders' rights, and do you support my right to sell exploits to whom I like? hitting on the Wassenaar Act, etc.?
All right. So thank you for that question. This has come up in a variety of contexts. What? Oh, repeat the question. So what is our stance on coders' rights, and do you support the right to sell exploits? To whom you like. All right. So as an initial matter, so yeah, we work with Coders' Rights Project. Andrew and myself are lawyers who work on that project, and we represent researchers defending their right to conduct research and then to speak about that research afterwards, especially when in the face of threats. And we do believe that code is speech, and so you have a First Amendment right to speak your code to whom you please. Now, we might not want you to, sell it to a repressive regime so it can be used against, innocent people. That might not be the best way to go about it. But this, that's the thing about freedom of expression is sometimes part of freedom of expression is that somebody is going to express something that you might not agree with, but you still have to have the right to be able to express it. Does that answer your question?
I mean, how does that break into the Wassenaar arrangement? And are zero-day sales going to be restricted, or have we backed away from that, and where are we at now?
To be absolutely clear, zero-day sales are not restricted under the Wassenaar arrangement. There was a proposal by BIS in the United States to restrict the sale of 0 days under our implementation of the Wassenaar arrangement. This proposal is not final, and in fact it was made entirely clear by both BIS and the Department of Commerce and the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State that the final version of this implementation will not include any of this crazy pants language about O days.
Hello. I was wondering what some of the issues surrounding the Eagle Eye system, the drones that fly over cities for long periods of time and capture pretty much everything. What are some of the issues and legal precedents surrounding that?
All right, anyone up on drones?
Yeah, I could talk about the legal side of things. So in general, in the past, in the pre-digital era, there was this idea that you didn't have an expectation of privacy when you were walking around in public. That's really started to change. So the Jones case that Shahid was talking about is about monitoring GPS in public over a long period of time. And the Supreme Court has said, in fact, you do have an expectation of privacy in that. At least 5 justices on the Supreme Court said that. So when you have a drone flying overhead and the ability to monitor people's locations in public, that actually starts to implicate their Fourth Amendment rights, even though they're in public the whole time. So any sort of government-operated system where you have drones flying over for long periods is going to start to implicate people's expectations of privacy. So, even though that's a new application of drones and of monitoring people's locations, it will have Fourth Amendment implications. I'm not familiar with any work that we've done on that particular system. We've done other work on cell phone tracking, the flying of dirt boxes, which are cell phone trackers in planes. I'm working on a FOIA case where we're suing the FBI and the U.S. Marshals to get more information about that. Anyone else?
Just a few pieces. The front edge of surveillance drones, as opposed to being federal agencies, tends to be state and local law enforcement. The FBI flies drones, Customs and Border Protection fly drones, but where drones really, I was going to say hit the ground, but that's an inapt image, I suppose, are sheriff's departments and police departments. And this is another area where local activism has a huge impact on the state of play on the ground. Seattle, for instance, was forced to ground its drones and send them to LA because of public opprobrium over the launch of their program. Here in the Bay Area, Alameda County, in the East Bay, made a decision about a year and a half ago, similarly restraining, though it didn't entirely shut down the drone program there. These are areas, and the last thing I want to say here is that when we talk about the militarization of local police, the procurement of essentially military surveillance tools are one leading vector of it. Surveillance drones, especially when you couple them with devices like facial recognition technology on high-definition cameras, exercising persistent surveillance, think about the ways that this impacts the First Amendment. If, for instance, let's say there were a social movement a month from now or a year from now that did prolific things in the manner of the Occupy movement, perhaps the Black Lives Matter movement, we know that those movements were monitored. To what extent could aerial drones be used not only to offend the privacy of people participating, but map the associations among them in a way that would be independently violating of a whole other set of constitutional norms? These are some of the issues. And just like on the TPP, just like on the battle around encryption, these are areas where your voices matter a great deal. Could I ask people, just take the indulgence of a question back, how many people here have communicated in any way with any one of your representatives in elected government over the last year? I am so excited to see that. If you have not, take a lead from your neighbors here. It can really make a difference, especially when you do it in groups.
Hi, as somebody who actually works security defense at a corporate level trying to protect sensitive data, I often find that trying to find the balance between the privacy rights of the employees versus trying to protect that sensitive data is often a challenge, and it's also very challenging to try to communicate and get across to executive teams who want no risk to their sensitive data. But yet, at the same time, I really can't break the encryption of everything that everybody is doing and prevent all data loss. Do you guys provide any sort of guidance like that for people working in corporations to help to do that kind of communication to executive staff or security managers who don't have experience in security management?
So we don't have any specific programs designed for corporate environments. Though, I mean, on the whole, we try to encourage people to increase security measures and to have quality security. The surveillance self-defense guide that Eva mentioned is pretty good. I mean, it's aimed towards activists, but actually the structure of it is designed to help anybody because it starts out with questions about what your threat model is, and you just answer that threat model a bit differently than an activist would, but it still is a different threat model for the corporate environment. And then, Cooper?
I guess that like Kurt said, we don't have anything specifically on that. And I mean, I guess the tactic that I would take is that, people generally don't like being surveilled. And it decreases morale a lot, right? And I mean, I think that this is the sort of thing where you have to have sort of the system administrator's code of ethics, right? Where even though you can read all of the emails, and even though you can look at all of the packets, you don't necessarily, right? And you need to codify that with your management, right? By, talking about employee morale, maybe, by talking about how, if it's done wrong, it could actually be detrimental to people's personal security, right? By talking about compartmentalization, right? So I think that those sorts of appeals to their bottom line always work really well on managers, and unhappy employees, people that don't want to innovate because they're scared that management is reading all of their emails, right, is not going to be good for their numbers. So that would be my suggestion.
All right, thank you.
So a joiner onto the last question. Have you encountered any sane frameworks for businesses to share information for security and anti-fraud purposes that also don't compromise on end users' rights? And if not, what do you think that framework would look like?
Well, there's bad news and there's bad news. And the bad news is that no sane frameworks matter anymore. Because the cybersecurity bill has passed. And now, no matter how it was that you were sharing threat intel with other private companies in the past, now the U.S. government gets to be in the room. And it looks very much as if the final version of the bill will not have any of the safety measures that would have minimized what the U.S. government could do with this data in any way. So I wish I had something more cheerful to tell you, but everything is awful.
On that cheery note.
Yeah, I had a question that was kind of related to the drone question, which was that recent case from 4 years ago about the GPS that came out of the Supreme Court that was so heartening. At the same time, I think even at the time it was obvious it was kind of quaint and dated because of license plate reading systems. And I was wondering, do you have a strategy for how to attack that? And especially considering the concern that I have that what's going to happen is if we simply say the government can't collect this data, that they will simply pay third parties to do it. And how can that fit into our current constitutional framework of how all of those privacy rights work? And also, just if I meant to say this at the beginning, thank you all for, your great work over the years protecting our freedoms and privacy.
Thanks. Thank you much.
Thank you for supporting EFF.
Thanks for making it possible.
So that was a multi-part question. The first was, is this sort of idea of expectation of privacy in public in the GPS case, the Jones case, sort of dated at the time of inception because of things like license plate readers? Is the government going to sort of just find more and more sophisticated ways of tracking people? And then the second question, I think, was, in license plate readers in particular, how do we attack that because they might just buy data from third parties? So the first one is, one thing that's nice about how our system of legal precedent works is that you can apply old precedents in new situations. And so I don't think that, saying that GPS monitoring implicates the Fourth Amendment and you might need a warrant for it is, a dead letter when it comes to license plate readers. If that's a way to track people in public, then that precedent actually applies very nicely. So I think at least looking at the 5 justices who looked at the GPS case that way, it would apply pretty directly to license plate readers, at least as far as mapping, instances of license plates being in a specific place over time. I would add that we're litigating a license plate reader case in front of the California Supreme Court case right now, and we're trying to make sure that the California Open Records Act doesn't bar us from getting access to that data that the California, law enforcement in California is using right now. Your other question is a good one. Private companies arguably have a First Amendment right to collect license plate data. There's some precedent on that. But when the government buys or pays, a third party to do things, surveillance, for instance, as their agent, they're acting as an agent of the government, and they are, at least in some cases, subject to the Fourth Amendment as well. This came up in our NSA cases, where our theory was that AT&T and the other telecoms were acting as agents of the government, and that's a pretty solid legal theory. So, how that plays out in the license plate case, it's sort of license plate readers remains to be seen, but it's not that the Fourth Amendment has nothing to say about the government involving private parties.
So, one other thing that security researchers can do is a thing that we did, which was me and a colleague, Dave Moss, did some research on ALPR devices, automatic license plate readers, and found using Shodan that several of them all over the country had a huge vulnerability where they had a terminal open to the public with no password. So you could log into any ALPR from anywhere, you could theoretically see license plate data, and do a number of things. We wrote a report on this, sent it to Louisiana, where Governor Bobby Jindal was about to pass a law spending a few $1 million on buying a new ALPR system for Louisiana. Based on that research, Jindal vetoed the law, and Louisiana did not get new ALPR readers. So you can research, find these technologies, find flaws in these technologies that lead to horrible violations of people's privacy, and get people in government aware of these things.
Similar story, one in California, one in Texas. So California recently, 2 bills in the last legislative session imposed essentially transparency and process reporting requirements both over ALPRs and MC catchers. Those are the cell site simulators that I think came up earlier when Andrew was talking about dirt boxes. Those laws can also be replicated in other places. In Texas, you were describing the sort of corporate outsourcing as the whole in the constitutional bucket, right? Great question. In Texas, there's almost like an inversion of that dynamic where our same colleague, Dave Moss, and I'll close with another story involving Dave and something he's working on next. He found that Vigilant Solutions, it's a company that essentially collects and then sells data from ALPR devices, had agreements with law enforcement agencies across Texas through which the departments were getting free gear, free surveillance gear, on the condition that then when they served warrant absconders, they would add 20 to 25% that would go straight to vigilance. So there you have corporations essentially conscripting the state as, debt collectors / revenue centers. I mean, it's incredibly gross. And then just the last piece here, Dave, one of Dave's next projects, we're going to either on the 26th or 27th of March host here in the Bay Area and in LA and in San Diego a one-day sprint collecting people concerned about ALPRs in particular, and we're going to research to what extent the law enforcement agencies across the state that we know are using ALPRs are complying with the state law recently passed that requires them to publicly disclose a privacy policy. So that's a very tactical opportunity, and we would love to have any of you participate. Thanks.
All right, we only have a little bit of time left. We have a couple more questions. We're trying to get very short answers to very quick questions. So please.
Hi. First of all, thank you. I applaud you for all the work you're doing. And I was wondering if you're doing any work on Spokio case, and if you do, can you comment on it?
Sorry, say that again. The
Spokio case.
Spokio. We filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court, and it was argued in the fall, I believe. And so we'll see how the Supreme Court rules on that. The question is a pretty technical legal one. It's can Congress create a cause of action under the Article 3 of the Constitution? And we strongly feel that it should be able to do that, because there's lots of things, Freedom of Information Act, other sorts of things where there's no monetary harm necessarily that is incurred, which is what one of the arguments should be. On the other side, that you have to suffer some sort of damage in order to sue under the Constitution. We feel that it's very important to preserve that right.
Okay, and last question, please.
Hi, over here. Does EFF keep track of the reach, I guess, in social media of various of these stories? Like, I'm watching the carousel behind you on the EFF homepage, and I'm wondering which of these had the best reach into, like, sort of middle America.
It's a little hard to hear from that mic. Could you repeat?
Is this better?
Yeah.
So which of these stories on the carousel behind you does EFF know had the best reach into social media, into like middle America, has reached the heart of America? Is that important? And do you have any tips for us and for the general public for engaging our friends and our peers in social media? Like how should we contextualize the stories?
Yeah. Okay. So at the moment, among the stories up right now, I think it's safe to say that Apple versus FBI has the nation's attention. And I would say among the many values at stake, the one to answer your question discreetly, and the question was about how do we recommend that you engage your neighbors on social media when discussing digital rights and maybe the encryption issues in Apple versus FBI in particular. There are a lot of values at stake. Privacy, international human rights. Security is one that tends to trump others, perhaps because in human consciousness, fear is an overriding emotion. But when communicating with people about that case, impressing upon them the way that the FBI's demands would undermine security for everyone, I think is a particularly compelling, at least first point. And I would encourage you to not rest with social media. Writing op-eds, commenting on news articles can be an influential way to raise your perspective, raise your voice. The stuff we're writing on the blog, you can always drop a link in a comment on a news article with a one-line introduction if you like. Like, that's part of why we do it. So please, leverage our work and help supply it to your neighbors to the extent you might find it persuasive.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's been wonderful to be back here. It's happy hour now, so please enjoy that.